Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. I want to talk to you about something powerful, something that touches every single one of us at some point in our lives. Change. Not just any change, but the kind that takes courage. The kind that asks you to stand at the edge of who you are and take a bold step into who you could become. This talk is called The Courage to Change, and I invite you to open your hearts and minds as we explore what it truly means to grow. Real change lasting. Transformative change never begins in the easy places. It never begins in comfort. It starts when we look at the familiar, the predictable, and the safe, and say to ourselves, this no longer serves who I'm becoming. That moment is not always dramatic. Often, it's a quiet nudge, a whisper inside that says, there's more than this. But that whisper takes tremendous courage to hear and even more to follow. You see, we human beings love comfort. We love patterns, routines, the warmth of what we already know. And there's nothing wrong with comfort until it starts holding us back, until it becomes a cage, beautifully decorated with certainty, but a cage nonetheless. I remember hearing stories of students who stayed in a course of study they didn't enjoy, simply because it was what their family expected. I've met professionals who spent years climbing ladders, leaning against the wrong wall, succeeding in careers that made them feel hollow. And every time I asked, why did you stay? The answer was almost always the same, because it was easier than the unknown. Ladies and gentlemen, the unknown will always be uncomfortable, but discomfort is the birthplace of transformation. You cannot learn something new while clinging to what is old. You cannot become someone different while holding tightly to who you used to be. In an educational context, this becomes even more critical. Students, teachers, administrators, we are all called to change. Education itself is a journey of evolution. Think about how much learning requires you to question, to unlearn, to rebuild. Whether it's learning a new theory, mastering a difficult subject, or adapting to a new way of teaching, progress demands discomfort. But within that discomfort is growth. And within that growth is power. I want to ask you something deeply personal. When was the last time you did something for the first time? When was the last time you challenged your own habits, your thinking, your actions? Too often we wait until we're forced to change by failure, by heartbreak, by disappointment. But real courage is choosing to change before we're pushed. There's a parable I once heard about a caterpillar who refused to build its cocoon. It was comfortable crawling, familiar with the ground. The skies were too far, too uncertain. So, it stayed grounded, never knowing it was meant to fly. How many of us are doing the same, refusing our wings because crawling is what we've always known? Ladies and gentlemen, the education we pursue in classrooms must extend to the education we practice in life. Change is a subject we all major in whether we've enrolled in it willingly or not. And the first lesson in that course is this: comfort zones are not where excellence is born. Think about the great innovators, the remarkable leaders, the artists and scientists who shaped history. None of them made their mark by staying where it felt safe. They ventured into the unknown, made mistakes, were ridiculed, doubted, and misunderstood. But they moved forward anyway because they had the courage to change. This isn't just about big life decisions. It's about the little moments. Choosing to speak up when staying silent feels safer. Choosing to try something new when you might fail. Choosing to say, I don't know, and be open to learning. Every single time you do that, you expand who you are. And every single time you refuse to do that, you shrink your potential. Let us remind ourselves, fear is not a stop sign. It's a signal that growth is near. You don't need to be fearless to change. You just need to be brave for one moment longer than your doubt. And if you can do that, if you can take that one step, then the next one becomes easier. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, but what if I change and it doesn't work out? And to that, I say, what if it does? What if the very thing you're afraid to try becomes the gateway to your purpose? What if the life you've been dreaming of is on the other side of a single courageous choice? In education, in relationships, in career, and in self-worth, the greatest chapters are written not in certainty, but in willingness. A willingness to say, I don't have all the answers, but I'm ready to grow. A willingness to believe that who you were yesterday does not have to define who you'll be tomorrow. So today, I challenge you, confront your comfort zone. Stare it in the face. Ask yourself, is this truly serving my future? And if the answer is no, have the courage to change. Let's talk today about something we all experience, something universal yet deeply personal, fear. No matter your age, your background, your level of success or education, fear is something you felt. But more important than fear itself is how we respond to it. That response is what defines our growth, our success, our character. Today's message is simple, yet profound. True courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. We often admire brave people and think they were born fearless, but that's a myth. The most courageous people in history were not without fear. They simply chose not to let that fear stop them. They looked fear in the face, heard its voice, felt its presence, and still moved forward. That's courage. In an educational setting, this truth becomes incredibly powerful. Think of a student afraid to ask a question in class, worried it might sound silly. Think of a teacher trying a new method that might fail. Think of an adult returning to school after years away, fearing they no longer belong. In every one of these examples, fear is present. But so is the potential for transformation, if they choose to act in spite of it. Fear whispers lies to us. It says, you can't. It says, what if you fail? It says, people will laugh at you. But courage responds with a different voice. It says, try anyway. It says, even if you fall, you'll rise stronger. It says, you don't need to be perfect, you just need to be willing. Let's take a moment to understand that fear, at its root, is not always a bad thing. It's a biological response designed to protect us. But in our modern world, it often overreaches. It tries to protect us from discomfort, not danger. It tries to shield us from rejection, not ruin. And when we allow fear to rule us, it doesn't keep us safe. It keeps us stuck. So how do we move forward when we're afraid? How do we act in spite of trembling hands, racing hearts, and the knot in our stomachs? We start by accepting fear as part of the process. The goal is not to eliminate fear. It's to move through it. Think of any moment of learning. Your first time riding a bike, your first speech in front of a crowd, your first job interview. Fear was likely right there with you, but so was your desire to grow, and that desire must be louder than your doubt. In life and in education, the people who make the greatest leaps are not those who feel the least fear, but those who feel it and choose to act anyway. And that choice to move forward in spite of fear is what makes all the difference. Because every time you choose action over avoidance, you strengthen your courage muscle. Every time you step into discomfort, you expand your capacity. I've heard students say, I'm not good at math, so I avoid it. I've seen adults say, I don't speak well, so I stay quiet in meetings. I've known teachers who say, I've taught this way for years, I'm scared to change it now. These fears are real, but when we let them dictate our behavior, we build walls around our potential. We must teach ourselves and each other that fear is not a stop sign. It's a signal. It's the body's way of saying this matters. It's the mind's way of saying you're entering unfamiliar territory, and that territory, unfamiliar, uncomfortable, is where the real learning lives. This isn't just theory. Research in education and psychology backs it up. Growth mindset, risk-taking in learning, resilience, these are all rooted in the ability to confront fear and keep going. When students are given space to fail, to try again, to be vulnerable, they learn deeper, not just wider. And the same applies to all of us. Let's also be clear, courage doesn't always look loud. It doesn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just showing up. Courage is saying, I'm scared, but I won't let that stop me. It's taking the test anyway, raising your hand anyway, submitting the application anyway, starting the conversation anyway. In classrooms, in offices, in homes, our lives are shaped by moments like these. And the more we lean into them, the more we become who we're meant to be. The best part? Courage is contagious. When one person dares to rise, others feel a little braver. When one student speaks up, others follow. When one leader admits they don't have all the answers, they give everyone permission to be honest. That's how courage builds community. So, if you're feeling afraid, I want you to remember this. Your fear is not a flaw. It's a sign that you're stretching. And stretching is how we grow. You don't need to be ready. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be willing. Decide to act. Decide to speak. Decide to try. Even if your voice shakes, even if your knees wobble, take the step. That step, however small, is how change begins. Thank you for being here today. Let us take a moment to pause. Breathe and ground ourselves in something we often overlook in the rush of life. Growth, not the kind of growth that's measured in grades or promotions, but the deep internal kind, the kind that changes how we see ourselves, how we treat others, and how we show up in the world. The truth is, growth is not a destination. It is not a one-time achievement. Growth is a lifelong journey, and that journey demands 3 powerful companions: reflection, resilience, and responsibility. Let's begin with reflection. In our fast-paced culture, we often celebrate action. We glorify doing, achieving, climbing higher, moving faster. But what we don't talk about enough is the power of pause. True growth begins not with motion, but with awareness, with the ability to stop, look within, and ask the hard questions. Am I aligned with who I want to be? Am I making choices that reflect my values? What am I learning from my experiences? Reflection is the mirror we hold up to ourselves, not to judge, but to understand. Without reflection, we repeat. With reflection, we evolve. Think of it like this. If you were driving on a road you'd never been on before, you wouldn't just keep going blindly. You'd stop to check your map. You'd look at where you've been and where you want to go. That's exactly what reflection does in the journey of personal growth. It helps us course correct, to grow not just older, but wiser. In an educational setting, reflection is just as essential. When a student receives a poor grade, reflection helps them understand what needs to change. When a teacher tries a new method, reflection allows them to refine it. When a school adopts a new program, reflection helps measure its impact. Without honest self-assessment, we remain in cycles of doing without understanding. And there is no meaningful growth in that. Now, let's talk about resilience. Because once you begin the journey of growth, once you start asking the hard questions, you will meet resistance. From the world, and sometimes from within yourself. You will fall. You will fail. You will be misunderstood. But here's what resilience teaches us. Failing is not the opposite of growing, it's part of it. Resilience is not about never being knocked down. It's about how many times you choose to get back up. Growth requires that we keep going, especially when it's difficult, especially when it would be easier to quit, to retreat into old habits, to say, this is just who I am. But resilience says, no, It's not who I am. It's who I've been. And I can become more. Every great learner, leader, and life changer has stumbled. Every artist, scientist, teacher, or student has faced doubt. But what sets them apart is their ability to persist, to get up with a little more wisdom, a little more strength, and a lot more humility. Resilience does not mean we don't hurt. It means we don't stop. And then there is responsibility. Because once you begin to grow, once you develop that awareness and resilience, you come to a crossroads. You realize this growth, it's not just about me. It's about what I do with it. It's about how I serve, how I contribute, how I use what I've learned to make a difference. Responsibility means owning your impact. It means realizing that every word you speak, every action you take, and every choice you make creates ripples. Growth is not truly growth unless it extends beyond ourselves. It becomes powerful when it is shared. In education, this sense of responsibility is profound. Students who grow not just in knowledge but in character begin to see that learning is not for test scores. It's for life. Teachers who grow take what they've learned and pour it into others. Leaders who grow lift those around them. Responsibility is the bridge between personal development and collective transformation. Let me be clear, responsibility is not about being perfect. It's not about carrying the weight of the world. It's about showing up with intention, owning your story, taking accountability when you fall short, and choosing, again and again, to be someone who builds rather than breaks, who uplifts rather than judges, who grows not for ego, but for purpose. When reflection, resilience, and responsibility come together, something extraordinary happens. You begin to live with integrity. You stop living on autopilot and start living with awareness. You stop fearing failure and start welcoming learning. You stop looking for shortcuts and start embracing the process. This kind of growth doesn't have an end point. You don't graduate from it. You don't finish it. And that's the beauty of it. Because every day, every challenge, every new season is an invitation to become a little more of who you were meant to be. We are gathered here today to talk about one of the most powerful forces in the human experience, change. Not just any kind of change, not the kind that happens to us while we sit still, but the kind we choose. The kind that wakes us up, that calls us to something more, that invites us to step outside of the stories we've been told or the ones we've told ourselves and write something new. Because here's the truth, change empowers us to rewrite our own narrative and impact the world around us. Let that idea settle in your mind for a moment. Every single one of us is living inside a story shaped by our past, our upbringing, our education, our struggles, our wins, our fears. Some parts of that story have been beautiful, full of joy and triumph. Other parts may have been painful, filled with doubt, setbacks, or silence. But regardless of where you've come from, what you've done, or what has been done to you, there is something incredibly liberating to realize you are not locked inside your story. You are the author of what comes next. Change gives you that pen. Change invites you to ask, what if this isn't the end of the chapter? What if there's more to me than what people see? What if I'm meant for something greater than I've allowed myself to believe? The most empowered people are not those who had a perfect beginning. They are the ones who chose to take ownership of their next chapter. They realize that while we cannot always control what happens to us, we can absolutely control how we respond and how we move forward. That response, that decision to pivot, to rise, to evolve, is what turns ordinary lives into extraordinary ones. In the world of education, this message is especially critical because so many young people are growing up with stories that have already been written for them by their environment. their circumstances, or others' expectations. You're not smart enough. You're not talented enough. People like you don't succeed. These limiting narratives are passed down like broken records, and unless someone teaches them how to press stop and play a new track, they will stay stuck in stories that were never truly theirs. But education, when done right, is not just about information. It's about transformation. It gives students the tools not just to read others' stories, but to write their own. It tells them you are not defined by where you started. You are not trapped by the mistakes you've made. You are not invisible. Education says, you matter. You belong. And you are capable of changing the entire trajectory of your life. I've met people who went back to school at 40, 50, 60 years old, not because they had to, but because they chose to. They rewrote the narrative that said, it's too late for me. I've seen students who grew up in poverty graduate with honors, breaking generational cycles because they chose to write a new story. I've seen young women who were told to stay small, rise up and lead with purpose. Change is what made that possible, and courage is what made change possible. But it doesn't stop with us. When we change, the world around us changes. When we rewrite our stories, we open the door for others to do the same. That's the ripple effect. That's the power of transformation. It multiplies. It lifts communities. It shifts cultures. It opens minds. It breaks silence. It builds legacy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not just motivational talk. This is a call to action. Because if you want to change the world, and I believe that deep down, many of us, you must first be willing to change yourself. That doesn't mean becoming someone you're not. It means peeling back the layers of who the world told you to be so you can uncover the truth of who you really are. You might have a voice that's been silenced. Use change to speak. You might have a dream that's been buried. Use change to dig it up. You might have a talent that's been ignored. Use change to develop it. You might have pain that's been carried too long. Use change to heal it. Rewriting your narrative is not about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about choosing what meaning you give it. It's about deciding that your story doesn't end with the trauma, the failure, or the fear. It continues with purpose. It continues with power. Let's remember that the most important stories we'll ever tell are the ones we tell ourselves. If that story is filled with limitation, self-doubt, and resignation, we will shrink to fit it. But if that story is fueled by growth, grace, and grit, we will rise to meet it. Change gives us the chance to choose that story every single day. So ask yourself today, what story am I living in? Who wrote it? And am I willing to pick up the pen and start a new chapter? Because you can, no matter where you are, no matter what you've been through. You can choose to grow, to rise, to lead, to serve, to love again. And as you do, you won't just change your life, you will create a ripple that touches everyone around you. As we stand here together, I hope you carry this with you. The courage to change is not a gift given to a lucky few. It is a choice we all can make. It is not about being fearless, but about moving forward even when fear whispers in your ear. It is about understanding that growth is not something that happens once. It's a lifelong journey that asks us to reflect, to rise, and to take responsibility for our actions. Change is not only about transforming ourselves, it's about rewriting the narrative we've been living in, and, in doing so, inviting others to do the same. Because every time you choose courage over comfort, growth over safety, purpose over pride, you are not just changing your story, you're helping to reshape the world around you. This moment right now is a turning point, a chance to decide whether you will stay in what is familiar or take a step, no matter how small, toward what is possible. You do not have to be ready. You only have to be willing. willing to reflect, willing to be resilient, willing to take responsibility for your own transformation, and willing to believe, even just a little, that a new story is possible. So pick up your pen, turn the page, and with every breath, every choice, and every courageous step forward, write a life that reflects not just where you've been, but everything you are still becoming. Thank you.